All right, here with my good friend Dan Jimenez. Today's topic, how to manage fear, which I think is probably one of the most common things I work with clients. Something that, man, can appear in many different settings and in many different forms and, appears in unexpected places. And, one of the common things that I find is that when you help a client and they actually have a breakthrough, one of the misconceptions is like, hey, I had this realization, I had this breakthrough, I made changes, fear should go away, right? Fear should go down. Yeah, no. It actually rises, right? It's kind of counterintuitive especially if you're, not a fan of fear. It actually goes up when you're taking new actions. You're out of your comfort zone. Things are moving quickly. The fear actually rises. And so it's common where, a client will end up in this place like, what the heck? I thought this was, I was trying to avoid fear and now it's right in my face. So what do I do? How do you manage fear? So one of the things I want to do first is just define what fear is, because I think that's a very important part of the process. And there's even some misconceptions around fear. And really, I mean, you can look up the definition. It's a response to a perceived threat, right? A response to maybe a potentially painful situation, real or imagined. We all know the fear we experience when, I don't know, the classic example is you see a snake in the grass, or, maybe we're imagining something happening to us that's, embarrassing, or, we lose money, or a relationship goes wrong, or whatever the thing is. It's just a response to a perceived threat. And it's that fight or flight, and they've added freeze now. Fight or flight or freeze response, right? It's ingrained deep into our minds. It's really like an evolutionary process that over thousands of years, I mean, it is a beneficial thing. Obviously, if there's something that's about to kill us, we want that fearful response. We either want to mostly flight, right? Run away from that thing. And so it's, the half full, the positive aspect of it is that it keeps us safe. It protects us. But there's a limit to it. It can make us freeze. It can limit action. It can keep us in action, right? So it becomes a limitation. But I wanted to at least acknowledge first and foremost that it is a necessary part of our brains, or who we are, the human experience, that it does have some value. It does have some benefits to it. Anything you'd add to that, Dan?
Yeah, no, I mean, in general, right? Like, it's a response you're going to get no matter where you are in life. You could have done all of the work. You could have made yourself a better person. You're still going to experience fear, right? And fear, I like the whole like false evidence appearing real as another, catchy one that I've heard that I liked. It is this perceived threat, right? It's a perceived, I will not be in a positive place in the future, right? This outcome will be a negative outcome, where there's a possibility of a negative outcome sometime in the future. I will not be okay. And, when you're, to touch upon the first point you made, when you're trying to create a new version of yourself, right? A new identity, you're stepping into the greatest version of yourself, or the version 2.0. Well, you're outside your comfort zone. And if you're outside trying to create a new identity, you're not acting in alignment with who you believe you are, right? Mm-hmm. We can consciously believe I'm this greatest version of myself, but subconsciously we're like, that's not me. I'm the same person that I was yesterday with all my fears and anxieties. And like, who is this person, going to the gym every day? Who is this person starting a new business and filing an LLC? who's this person going into my boss's office asking for a raise? Like, we get on the conscious level, like we're really excited about it, but subconscious, we're like, that's not me. That's not who I am. And that's when this whole fear thing pops up. And yeah, running from a mountain lion, sure, it's going to help. But trying to get a raise from your boss or ask for more responsibility, like, not really a great place to be in, that fight or flight when you're trying to negotiate something like that.
Right. Yeah. And just again, to look at what is fear, it's, you said the keyword subconscious, like because it originates in such these primitive parts of our brain and it's hardwired into our circuitry and our nervous system. Like, it can be one of the most challenging things to overcome because it's not even subconscious, it's unconscious. Like, it happens in an instant when we're like, oh shit, what if he gets mad? What if they, what are they going to think about me? Or what if I fail here? And like, we imagine even more of these scenarios, and it becomes kind of this like vicious cycle of like, now you're thinking of all of the worst case scenarios, and it creates even this thought process that, as we talked about in several of our last discussions, like this almost self-fulfilling prophecy, this manifestation for those things to actually happen. Because if we're visualizing that bad stuff happening, and we're not thinking about what can happen, like the really intended result, the success that we do want, or how are we going to pour this milk carefully into the glass versus not trying to spill the glass over, like it. And now in that mind-body connection, you're not creating very resourceful imagery, right, to show up as the person you do want to be. It's, you're imagining who you don't want to be or the things you don't want to happen. And so it's really just, I've been using this a lot and looking at, one of the last videos I did was on habits, and habits are really just strategies. Like, fear is just a strategy that we use most of the time. It's just to keep us safe and protect us. It's well-meaning, but like you said, definitely not the most effective strategy we can be using for the promotion, for the new body we want because we're going to the gym every day, or even an enhanced relationship because we might show up with the person that we've spent years with differently. And now that's threatening. That's a potential threatening, right? That could threaten the relationship. What if they don't like who this new me is?
Yeah, absolutely. So what would you say, there's obviously different levels of fear. There's different levels of threat response. But starting at, let's say, low level fear, like those, little things. Oh, I'm afraid I'm going to be late. I'm afraid I'm, not going to do the thing I was supposed to do, or I'm going to forget something. Do you manage those in the same way you manage high threat stuff, or do you have different tools and techniques depending on the threat?
I'm sure I do. I'm trying to think of an example. I'm sure I do deal with them differently, but I think ultimately it kind of comes back to the same thing when we're talking about fear specifically. Like, one, we have to acknowledge what it is and why it's happening, because we want to start changing the thought process behind it. And so, again, going back into the how does it happen, there's been this long debate in psychology where they're looking at the mechanisms of fear and how does it exist. So you take the classic example, you see a snake, there's the stimulus. Now, is it a emotional reaction? And then we put meaning. So let me back up. The way our brains work, there's data, there's things happening around us in our environment. We say, what does this mean? And then we assign an emotion, right? If this is bad, right, this is potentially bad, now I'm fearful or I feel bad. and then the action happens as a result of that. We have our response to the environment. Fear is interesting because there's kind of this cycle that happens. Is it the emotion, and then now I'm thinking I'm afraid, or do I recognize that stimulus as dangerous and now I feel the emotion of fear? It kind of, there's like a cycle there. They kind of feed off of each other, right? And it really doesn't matter. But the most important thing in that is there's something that we have that's under our control, which is how we're processing it, both the stimulus and the emotion that's occurring. So let's say, whatever the thing is, it's 11:55 and I have to be at a meeting and, at noon, and I'm going to be late. And okay, hold on. The stimulus, right, it's this time I have this important meeting, or it could be something, a greater fear. There's something happening and we're processing what's happening. We have control over the processing of the stimulus versus it just being this unconscious, there's a stimulus, now I'm afraid. And that, no, you can manage that by changing what the environment, what the stimulus means. So is that making sense so far?
Yeah. To your point on the what came first, the emotion or the meaning, right? Like something that happens over time, you've heard like trauma gets stored in the body, right? Like emotion, it's in the body, right? It's the thing that comes up. So there is a meaning attached to it. If there was no meaning attached to it at all, you'd be emotionless, right? Like you wouldn't have some sort of physical stimulus. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you see something, you sit there and think, how do I feel about this thing? Right. And then kind of go into it. And I do find those the most interesting of when you're like, whoa, why am I reacting this way in this situation? Just recently talking with a client of mine, and she was mentioning how in these situations, she's like, it's crazy. Like I will be about to talk to someone in person and all of a sudden I freeze up, and it's just this like my heart rate raises, my sweat glands start, pouring in. And sorry, can you hold on? Let's pause for a second.
Yeah.
Sorry. Hey. Okay. Awesome. All right. Mother-in-law's going shopping. So she was saying, she gets in these situations, blood pressure raises, she starts sweating a little bit, and she gets really nervous. And when she thinks about it consciously, she's like, there's no reason for me to get nervous right now. Like, there's no threat. I don't feel like I'm going to mess up. And as we talked about it, she's like, oh, I remember it was this one time when I was, 10 years old and I was about to present in front of class. It was like a book report that she had to present. And she was like, I just remember I was next. And then all of a sudden, all of these emotions came up and I was really nervous about it. And I was like, great, that's definitely an early time, but that's not the genesis of the event. Because in that situation, nothing was happening. She was prepared. She felt comfortable talking in front of people. It's just something came up. So we never actually got to the original event that created the fear. But I was like, I bet there's probably an earlier event that happened in your life where you thought you were prepared and then you were caught off guard and some negative repercussion happened, right? You got called out, right? There was an actual consequence. And because of that, you were so caught off guard. You were like, no, I'm totally prepared for this. And now you're, oh, I completely failed, right? Like I had this failure in my life. It's a perceived failure. You think you failed. And now that's what creates that neural connection, right? Like, and so now when she's 10 years old and she's about to give this presentation, despite having no thoughts around failing, I'm totally prepared for this, I'm good, the feeling, the emotion came up before the putting meaning to something. But it was a
Right.
subconscious, right? Or
Yeah.
unconscious, whatever you want to call it, right? Like,
That moment
and
was hardwired into her mind and her nervous system without having to even think about it or consciously think
right,
about it. It just happened. Yeah.
right. She couldn't even get to the point where she's like, this is weird. Like, I don't know, I have no idea why this is a fear that I have. And so just to give, that example of like, it doesn't necessarily have to make sense to you, right? Like it doesn't
Uh-huh.
have to, sure, we can sit there and dig and find the exact moment when it happened and kind of unravel that. But like, we know we can extrapolate from this. Like you're in a situation, the same thing happens in your life over and over again. Like you'll notice this pattern. Oh, every time I go give a presentation and I always think I'm prepared, but then, I get
Yeah.
nervous. It's
Yeah.
it's it's different than I'm giving a presentation and I feel completely unprepared, right? Like
Yeah.
it's different. So like we don't need to get to that genesis, but we know, okay, this is what happens. This is the stimulus and this is the response that I have. I have fear in this situation. Now
Exactly.
we
Yeah.
can kind of unravel that from that piece.
Yeah. Love it. That's a great example. And that's really what I'm getting at is because the fear most of the time is a largely unconscious, subconscious process that's happening. And it could be based on past traumas, past experience. In large part, it is. Sometimes it's almost inexplicable, but the more we bring awareness, oh, that's why I feel, oh, it's back to that thing that happened when I was 5 years old. And now you can know it for what it is. But even just bringing awareness into that process and begin to change, what does this moment mean right now? Is this imagined? Oh no, this is based on something in the past. Okay, this is different. I am prepared now. I know my stuff. This fear is just, it's natural. It's, making sure it's an old, deeply ancient part of me making sure I'm okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having my back. But, I got this. And here's the other interesting thing about fear is that there's some of the same chemical, biological processes happening for when we feel elated or when we feel these more pleasurable experiences. And what I found interesting, it's just a side note, but you look at the definitions, the traditional definitions out there of fear is it's unpleasant, it's distressful, it's all this half empty connotations and meanings around it. But if we know it has the same kind of chemicals as a pleasurable experience, could be an adrenalized state. We like maybe an example would be, this isn't for everyone, but watching scary movies, we kind of like that getting spooked a little bit, right? Like, or Halloween time, right? Or for the adrenaline junkies out there that really thrive off of it, like the actual feeling of fear can be pleasurable. And if you can even train your mind to say, I love this feeling. I've never felt more alive. And you get used to it and it empowers you, because that's really what fear does. Makes you more alert. Even having a spike of adrenaline gives you superhuman strength, right?
It
Like
heightens your
grandma's lifting
awareness.
cars off of kids, right?
The
Yeah, what you're saying?
Yeah, it's the heightened alertness, heightened awareness, heightened sense of focus. You know, to your point of those feelings, nervousness and excitement physiologically are the same feeling, right? Like all of those same chemicals are dumping, like all the same things happen, for the most part when you're nervous or when you're excited. It's just kind of the thought pattern that's going on in your head. It's the story behind it. When I was learning to skydive many years ago, nervous and excitement was something that I'd waver back and forth with from every moment, right? Like, oh, I'm on the next jump load. All right, next load goes in 20 minutes. Oh, super excited, right? Like, oh yeah, this is
Yeah.
great. High-fiving people. I'm getting pumped up. I'm definitely awake. I'm definitely alert.
Yeah.
Then there's the 10-minute call. And I'm like, oh, okay, 10 minutes. Okay. Do I go to the bathroom? All right. Got to go to the bathroom. Okay. Do I have all my stuff? Do I have my altimeter? Do I have my glasses? Is the altimeter set to 0 before I get on the plane? Is my chest
Yeah.
strap done? Have I checked my reserve chute? Like, the closer it got to go time, like the
Yeah.
excitement went more to nervousness, but it was all the
Mm.
same feeling. It was just the thought of like, oh, now I'm closer to this potential threat. Now I'm closer
Yeah.
to the activity.
Yeah.
But then you have your buddy come and check you out, and they do the 3-point check, and they're like, cool, you have your altimeter, you have your glasses, awesome, you have your chest strap, you have your thigh straps on, your reserve looks good, your main looks good, like your pilot chute's packed right, like you're like, oh, high five, cool. You give like
Yeah.
the slapping knuckles, right? Have a good
Yeah.
jump, right? Blue skies, right? Like then you start getting excited again, right? And
Yeah.
it's this, it definitely, it's a really interesting, that's where I've probably experienced it the most, where you're getting both of those inputs that are
Yeah.
wavering back and forth. And it really is where your head's at. What's going to go wrong versus what's going to go right? Am I doing, like, I signed up to do this. I plan to do this. I trained to do this. And so
Yeah.
really being able to control your headspace is super important, right? In
Right.
those moments in terms of managing fear.
Yeah, it's another great example of how you're consciously changing the experience of it. Same things going through your body, same response, fear versus excitement, same thing. But how you're processing it. And to the example of, your friend, like now can you say, oh, what I'm feeling, this fear is actually, I'm going to show up excited. I'm going to show up with passion. I'm going to show, this is my moment. And man, I know my shit. I've been preparing. I got this down. I can't wait to crush this interview or conversation or even public speaking, like one of the top fears, right? And
Right.
in the world. I mean, now how that physiological like process that's happening actually enhances you, again, makes you more alert, makes you more active, energetic. Like you're changing the meaning of it. And you do that over and over again. You do it with repetition, you do it with intensity, and you rewire how it's happening, the experience for you in your brain, literally. And so you take this, what was largely an unconscious process that was mostly this reptilian, old part of your brain happening, to bringing more awareness and consciousness, critical thinking and logic and reason and consciousness into the process. And that's the biggest thing that I can say for any type of fear, small, large, being like the most important, best thing that you can do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Where the mind goes, right? When they say like where attention goes, energy flows, right? Thinking about attention as it's what you're putting your mind to and how you're thinking about an issue. I'm a big believer that fear, I used to say, hey, fear is really helpful. I'm kind of now changing my language around that as like, fear is not helpful. The physiological response that you get during a fear situation, sure, it'll help you act. But being able to be in a clear headspace, I think, is probably the most important thing you can do. And, to your point of that, like, let's practice getting in a clear headspace. What can get me, out of that fight or flight and into a more, logical thinking or reasoning thinking, about the situation.
Right. Love it. Well, I hate to cut us short, and I know we could probably go for hours on this, but I appreciate it as always.
Yeah. Awesome, man.
Cool. Thanks everyone for joining in, listening, or watching, and stay tuned for more.
Cool. I know you have a client, right?